It's a Heidel minicast. And now, Scott Clark.
It's Machen's Christianity and Liberalism. We're in Chapter 7 on page 159, where Machen is discussing the nature of the church invisible, the true church, and the state of the church today.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
Machen wrote, "And the church invisible, the true company of the redeemed, finds expression in the companies of Christians who constitute the visible church today. But what is the trouble with the visible church? What is the reason for its obvious weakness? There are perhaps many causes of weakness, but one cause is perfectly plain. The church of today has been unfaithful to her Lord by admitting great companies of non-Christian persons not only into her membership, but into her teaching agencies. It is indeed inevitable that some persons who are not truly Christian shall find their way into the visible church. Fallible men cannot discern the heart, and many a profession of faith which seems to be genuine may really be false. But it is not this kind of error to which we now refer. What is now meant is not the admission of individuals whose confessions of faith may not be sincere, but the admission of great companies of persons who have never made any really credible confession of faith at all, and whose entire attitude toward the gospel is the very reverse of the Christian attitude. Such persons, moreover, have been admitted not merely to the membership, but to the ministry of the church, and to an increasing extent have been allowed to dominate its councils and determine its teaching. The greatest menace to the Christian church today comes not from enemies outside, but from enemies within. It comes from the presence within the church of a type of faith and practice that is anti-Christian to the core. We are not dealing here with delicate personal questions. We're not presuming to say whether such and such an individual is a Christian or not. God only can decide such questions. No man can say with assurance whether the attitude of certain individual liberals towards Christ is saving faith or not. But one thing is perfectly plain. Whether or no liberals are Christians, it is at any rate perfectly clear that liberalism is not Christianity. And that being the case, it is highly undesirable that liberalism and Christianity should continue to be propagated within the bounds of the same organization. A separation between the two parties in the church is the crying need of the hour. Many indeed are seeking to avoid the separation. Why, they say, may not brethren dwell together in unity? The church, we are told, has room for both liberals and conservatives. The conservatives may be allowed to remain if they will keep trifling matters in the background and attend chiefly to the weightier matters of the law, and among the things thus designated as trifling is found the cross of Christ as a really vicarious atonement of sin. Such obscuration of the issues attests a really astonishing narrowness on the part of the liberal preacher. Narrowness does not consist in definite devotion to certain convictions or in definite rejection of others, but the narrow man is the man who rejects the other man's convictions without first endeavoring to understand them, the man who makes no effort to look at things from the other man's point of view. For example, it is not narrow to reject the Roman Catholic doctrine that there is no salvation outside the church. It is not narrow to try to convince Roman Catholics that doctrine is wrong, but it would be very narrow to say to a Roman Catholic, you may go on holding your doctrine about the church, and I shall hold mine, but let us unite in our Christian work, since despite such trifling differences, we are agreed about the matters that concern the welfare of the soul. For, of course, such an utterance would simply beg the question. The Roman Catholic could not possibly both hold his doctrine of the church and at the same time reject it, as would be required by the program of church unity just suggested. A Protestant who would speak that way would be narrow because, quite independent of the question whether he or the Roman Catholic is right about the church, he would show plainly that he had not made the slightest effort to understand the the Roman Catholic point of view. The case is similar with the liberal program for unity in the church. It could never be advocated by anyone who had made the slightest effort to understand the point of view of his opponent in the controversy. The liberal preacher says to the conservative party in the church, "Let us unite in the same congregation, since of course doctrinal differences are trifles." But it is the very essence of conservatism in the church to regard doctrinal differences as no trifles, but as the matters of supreme moment. A man cannot possibly be an evangelical or a conservative, or as he himself would say, simply a Christian, and regard the cross of Christ as a trifle. To suppose that he can is the extreme of narrowness. It is not necessarily narrow to reject the vicarious sacrifice of our Lord as the sole means of salvation. It may be very wrong, we believe that it is, but it is not necessarily narrow. But to suppose that a man can hold to the vicarious sacrifice of Christ and at the same time belittle that doctrine, to suppose that a man can believe that the eternal Son of God really bore the guilt of men's sins on the cross and at the same time regard that belief as a trifle without bearing upon the welfare of men's souls, that is very narrow and very absurd. We shall really get nowhere in this controversy unless we make a sincere effort to understand the other man's point of view.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by HeidelbergReformationAssociation.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.